The human mind can communicate with beings across veils and distances. The cosmos is magical, like it's all this one sacred thing. And within that context, you've had presumably millions and billions of years of civilizations all over the place. They've always been here. We just spent 300 years pretending that wasn't the case. The collapse of the official narrative is like 60% done. If they wanted to do disclosure, they should have done it in the late 60s when people actually believed Walter Cronkite and presidents. It will only make things worse now. Apocalypse is unveiling. We miss disclosure, we will get unveiling.
Welcome back to World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits. In this episode, we're going to get to grips with the UFO phenomenon in a deeper way than we've ever done before on this channel. It's something I've talked a lot about in recent episodes because I think an awakening to the realities of it is underway and likely to intensify in the coming years. But I realize that what we've been missing is an understanding of the cosmos that makes sense of it all and puts this phenomenon in context. Because ultimately, everything in the cosmos is a manifestation of spirit or consciousness. And who better to talk to about that than a magician? And so I invited Gordon White, one of the world's most famous magicians and the man behind online magic school Rune, to join me on the channel to help us understand UFOs and aliens and what they really are. Please do show the channel some support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications. Oh, and bear in mind that as usual, there's an extended version of this video with an exclusive bonus section. In that part of the video, Gordon and I go off-piste and talk about Nazis, the post-war Nazi International, transhumanism, Peruvian alien mummies, and all sorts of other weird stuff. So do sign up either here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com if you want to watch that. Signing up at the site will also give you access to my back catalogue of long-form live streams and private forum, and you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening, and now without further ado, let's get into this video. All right, so we are live, and I'm here with Gordon White of Rune Soup. Gordon, welcome to World Astrology Report, and thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to have you here today because I think we have a lot to talk about. And I'd like to just start off by asking you, why does a magician and somebody who runs what I think is the biggest online magic school in the world have a course on UFOs?
Well, at the time it was because people voted on it and they picked UFOs, fairies, and psi. But it's a really good question because the phenomena are a chapel perilous, to use the Robert Anton Wilson term. And actually, this is something I spoke to Richard Dolan about when we were in the Australian desert a few years ago, where he said the ufology is, you walk in one end like a chapel perilous, and all of a sudden you find philosophy and science and meaning and existentialism and all these things that you thought you were going in to look for little secret documents that some president sent to someone and what have you. You just end up in a much bigger and much richer world. So the overlap with magic, in particular spirit beings and beings from different realms, is fairly obvious. And that's a well-worn trail of research when you think of people like Jacques Vallée and so on, looking at patterns of spirit or entity contact through recorded history and matching that to things that we have from the last 80 to 90 years.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And so maybe we can also introduce something else that I think is probably going to be of interest to this audience, because this obviously is primarily an astrology channel. And I know you have a model of time and how to understand time, your blended cycle model. I was wondering if you could introduce that model to the audience. Like, what is it? How does it work? And then sub-question, what does it tell us about why this phenomenon is being talked about so much at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So for me, and we'll have this conversation from an astrological perspective, which is, I pose it as a question. Is the universe cyclical because astrology works, or does astrology work because the universe is cyclical? And it swings on whether you think astrology is an imperfect human effort to sense make in a cyclical cosmos, and thus it becomes one of a forest of astrologies, right? And I think that's the case. You can also say, no, astrology is real, and like everything else is kind of like a mutated version of it. That's less satisfactory, because what tends to happen is you go, all right, well, let's start whole sign house, tropical whole sign house. All right, that seems to work. Okay, let's shift the house system a little bit. Okay, that still works. All right, let's go sidereal. It's like, well, now you're getting annoying, but I can still find ways in which this works, or I can find practitioners that are very good at a sidereal. And now you're kind of you're 5 steps removed from what you think the universe works as, which is some sort of tropical whole sign system. And then the one that broke it for me in a really fun way was the Mayan calendar system, because Venus is a war planet there. So it's like, well, now we're way off. And these things work. They all work. So what is actually happening here? And from a magical perspective, all of these things are gifts. They are languages that have been either given to us or that we have co-learned as a result of contact with, let's say, stellar beings, the upper world, whatever you want to call it. And so for me, the blended cycle model is standing in that reality and inviting any model that accords with the idea that the universe is some sort of cycle, breathing in, breathing out shape. And that includes economic models, that includes multiple astrologies and so on. And particularly when it comes to big moments, and we're in one, that you can kind of stack them up and go, well, there's 7 of them that are saying this 15-year period is significant to the tune of between 3,000 and 5,000 years to 170 years to what have you. But they're all kind of flashing, not necessarily red in an alarming way, but they're all flashing a shift or a turnover. And that is particularly interesting for me. Like, it's one of those, the bottom half of the blended cycle model is important if true. And that's the prophetic stuff. The top half is the more precise, actual mathematical ones. The bottom half is like, okay, and also we have Hopi prophecies, we have Kero prophecies, we have all these things talking about this one moment, which is important if true. And the if true part, you sort of look further up the spreadsheet at the different astrological models and say, well, it does appear to be approximately now.
I see. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And we've talked about some of these cycles on this channel, I think, that are highlighting this particular period as one for the books, let's say. But just to bring in the UFO phenomenon again, why might this be all the rage? Why might a lot of people be talking about it at this current time, if this is one of those periods that we've identified?
My take on this is a little bit different, which is I think it's because there is some, let's say, turnover in the medium term. So the 300, give or take, year cycles, and coming out of ones that are rationalist, materialist. Because I tend to think that it's more a case of they're not showing up again. They're not like here, like they've always been here. We just spent 300 years pretending that wasn't the case. So for me at this moment, it's actually scales are dropping from the eyes rather than a new thing is being unveiled in the literal apocalyptic sense, which means unveiling of, oh, look, it's the Space Brothers. I think it's more that we're ending some cycles that make it more challenging to assert the reality of these phenomena. But regardless of how you cut it, it's like, oh, well, we are entering a time where meaning making and reality is simply different. Like the good thing about the prophetic model is, so for instance, the Pachacuti is the Kero prophecy for now. Reality literally recomposts and reforms. Like things are, it's not like a Thomas Kuhn structure of scientific revolutions where we just have this ever expanding light of scientific accuracy. It's like, no, different things are true now. It's very like Charles Fort. And reality is composed of new, in this case, probably very old ontologies. But that's kind of more how I see it, which is that we are finally putting aside some how to say this nice, we're putting to the side some ideas we've extracted all the usefulness from them, and holding on to them for much longer is not a good idea.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. So essentially you're talking about a shift from this sort of interregnum where we've had this extremely materialist perception of reality into, or perhaps returning to where we came from, but from a new place in some sense. And
Yes.
I wonder, like, then, if could you maybe sketch out a model for the cosmos that might allow people to situate this phenomenon and understand it a bit better and see why it's actually something old, perhaps, rather than new?
Sure. So I think about something like disclosure differently, which is it sort of accidentally happened, and not because of officialdom, because officials are always wrong even when they're not. What's the shift that is occurring is that we're actually just not listening anymore. Like and so waiting to hear what a government official says about Peruvian mummies, in referencing something we're going to discuss later, it's just not that. That's not what happens anymore, right? Like, people either accept the reality of that, and in most cases, this is it. They're just too dumb. Like, they actually they don't care in that sense. So what's happening is that we are reweaving, how to say this? We are reweaving meaning making to assert our own, like, epistemologies. Like, there's a famous ufology book that isn't very good, with a great title. I think I mentioned this before, called "I Know What I Saw," and it's coming back to that idea of, I assert the reality of my lived experience. Because if you think about the last 300 years of, let's say, scientific materialism, it's essentially a 3-century gaslight, which is, love doesn't exist, it's just chemicals. The thing you think you're seeing isn't really there. Like, the whole thing is like, your lived experience is wrong, and you need me to tell you what's actually going on. And we're moving out of that into more of the returning to a lived experience model. Why this pertains to things like ufology is, whenever people poll Americans, because that's usually where it happens, something in the order of 54 to 60% of people will say they have seen something or have encountered something that they would consider to be extraterrestrial in the evening. And more than 70% of so-called abductions or experiences, they're aware they don't leave their bedroom when it happens, but they've had an encounter with something. Now, when you have numbers that are 60% and above, you come back to an effectively tribal frame, because that's how we used to live for hundreds of thousands of years. We still do. We just ignored it for 3 centuries. We live in the context of an interwoven dimensional spirit world bundle. Like, we're nested in this glorious and psychedelic cosmos. And we kind of pull at things and go, well, that's a UFO, that's a gray, that's an angel, that's a fairy, and cool, we can play that game. But just generally, it's like lying out in a field under the stars and just being overwhelmed by the immensity of it. That's the cosmos, and it's always been like that. And we're kind of returning to asserting our lived reality in that way. That's one of the things that I would say is the big shift. Charles Fort called it the dominant of wider inclusions, which means that the way we make things true now incorporates more of the personal encounters with the strange.
So essentially what you're saying is that disclosure isn't really about announcing something new that's come into the world. It's really about perhaps the end of the gaslighting, or
I think that, like, look around the world and say, who would you believe? Trump, Macron, Starmer? Like, which one of these animals would, like, the ones that aren't on coke? That's just Trump, and he's a known liar. And it's like, all right, so can you imagine Macron standing up and saying, there's aliens, by the way? I'm like, how much coke did Zelensky give you today? Like, what the hell is going on? So if they wanted to do disclosure, they should have done it in the late 60s, when people actually believed Walter Cronkite and presidents and so on. It will only make things worse now. And that's what I think. Like, so apocalypse is unveiling. We miss disclosure, we will get unveiling, right? And I don't think there's a moment where everyone stands up, and I know ufologists want this, and say, see, I told you so. Like, to who? Most people are like, oh yeah, they probably exist, and they carry on with their day. Even the limited and frankly disappointing and suspicious so-called disclosures we've had over the last 5 or 6 years, that's exactly what happened. Like, front page of the New York Times, oh, aliens are real. Oh well, off I go to work. And yeah, I'm not sure. Like, disclosure is a very personal thing. It's like I think a lot of people in ufology who are agitating for it, they're on a personal journey of validation, psychologically speaking, and that way leads to heartbreak if you don't realize that fairly soon. I do think by the end of like Pluto and Aquarius, the reality of it will be self-evident. But I kind of think it's there now. Like, have you ever met anyone ever in the last decade who doesn't think there's something to it?
Very rarely. It doesn't seem to happen too much. Yeah, I think most people are on board, and they're just. I guess the whole issue of disclosure is waiting for the official recognized position, but in the ivory towers and in academia, and so yeah.
And then that's like, that whole way of making meaning is gone. That's actually what Fort says, right? Like, if you look at the pillars of how a stable Western civilization makes things true, it's medicine, ruined; military, ruined; government, ruined; academia, ruined. Like, who are we just going to ask builders now? Like, I would actually I would go and ask, builders, hairdressers, what have you, because the pillars of making things true have fallen.
I think I have to agree with that. So, those people who are sort of waiting for this great moment of the president sort of standing up and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, aliens," are probably, or maybe well, be disappointed.
Yeah, they would. I mean, unless we can ask the aliens where Epstein's client list is. Like, these people are liars. You can't. But there's aliens now. Is there? There's aliens, and there isn't a client list. That's amazing. Like, we're past the disclosure moment.
Right. So really, what we're looking at is a reintegration of the idea of spirit and the acknowledgement that spirit is real, essentially. So with that in mind, where do you stand on the kind of nuts and bolts aspect of the UFO phenomenon versus the consciousness kind of school of understanding it? Is that a kind of false dichotomy? Is there a third way of seeing it? Kind of, how would you explain it?
So it's definitely a false dichotomy. And what I tend to do is kind of invite people on a thought experiment. And you'll appreciate this because it involves remote viewing, amongst other things. But if you look at what we do, in fact, have scientific evidence for, we do have scientific evidence for telepathy and remote viewing. So we know that the human mind can grapple with and engage with things at a seeming distance. So we have that. We have after-death communication and ELEs. So we have scientific evidence for communication beyond death. So the human mind can communicate with beings across veils and distances. Now, with that information, you look around the world and find a universal tradition of engaging with star nations, star beings. Shaska Rune is the Kera word for it, or the Quechua word for it. And so we have these skills, and we have this universal attestation of tangling with the stars, at least on that level. That's, let's say, just arbitrarily say that's 70% of it, 70%. We also have, and this is where you have less evidence for more extreme events, all kinds of stuff, teleportation, bilocation, spontaneous combustion, like squishy beings can do crazy things. You have, the Green Children of Woolpit. Like, you have stories throughout history of squishy, strange things, which opens the door to both things being true, that the cosmos is magic. That's my version of the cosmos is consciousness, but whatever, same thing. And within this magic cosmos, there are, amongst other things, little green men. And more importantly, I think, in cultures that are aware of this, you have much more physical interdimensional contact. So I just got back from South America, and this story is an Aymara, it's Quechua. They both have overlapping stories for Tiwanaku, but obviously the archaeological evidence for Tiwanaku being 12,000 years old, I think, is very solid. And they found in the early 20th century like Ice Age animal bones there and so on. So, all right, who did that 12,000 years ago? If you ask the Quechua speakers in the area, one of the stories is that Wiracocha just appeared one day on the Altiplano from another dimension with these skills and these knowledge. And that's where that first person came from. So is he an alien? I mean, I don't know. I've seen someone kind of turn into a jaguar in the jungle. Like, I was definitely on ayahuasca at the time, but I've taken a lot of psychedelics. And I don't know what was going on, but I saw like his shoulders change and come back down and think, okay, I'm witnessing something very, very strange. But of course I am. I'm in the middle of the Amazon in like a Shipibo ayahuasca ceremony. So when you get to the level of, okay, is it little green men or is it consciousness? It's sort of, how do you think the universe works? Like, how do you think the whole thing works? You need to kind of work that out before you settle on an opinion of, oh, I think the Phoenix Lights were a spaceship. It's sort of way too downstream. And that's the joy of it. That's the fun. That's actually what Richard Dolan was saying. It's like you start off in ufology expecting to have a yes/no answer to what the Phoenix Lights were. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, I'm listening intently to Gordon talking about someone turned into a jaguar, and I'm with him on this story all the way. And you think, okay, I'm sorry.
So really what we need is like a much expanded version of what's possible in the universe. And perhaps having something like that might explain the kind of multifaceted nature of the UFO phenomenon, because we put all this stuff together, all these different phenomena, say everything from, say, the airship mystery of the 1890s, and then going back further, the fairy faith and so forth, and the fae. But then also in the 20th century, even, we have so-called aliens who are humanoids, saying that they're from Venus. We have the Greys, we have reptilians, we have all sorts of different phenomena, and we have suggestions that some of these things have happened almost purely in sort of psychic terms, and then other suggestions that they've had physical effects, and there are physical traces we can find. There's this great variety of things we're lumping together. And is that really because many different things are possible in the cosmos, and we have been in this little box for quite a long time?
This is the box we're getting out of, right? So this is the dominant of wider inclusions, or what Terence McKenna would call the archaic revival. And we don't even, I mean, I like English, by the way. I'm not the first person to jump in and poo-poo the language specifically. But it's nevertheless true that there's more subtlety when it comes to spirit in non-English languages. And even to the point of like the tools we are bringing to this particular challenge, if they're not sufficiently interrogated, we're not gonna do a very good job of it. But yes, I actually think it's kind of the point of these phenomena, and whether that's intentional on their behalf or not, it obviously isn't in all cases. It's something that is designed to make us think these bigger thoughts, right? That same ayahuasca trip, my first ever dieta, during a particular evening of ceremony, when the musicians were playing and it was some kind of like chime bell thing, I was watching with like the psychedelic impressions in my mind make these strange and beautiful like golden matchings to the bell, and it was this remarkable pattern. And it suddenly occurred to me that if I saw that prior to the invention of these bells, I would kind of know what bells were. And it was like this half a step in front of me teaching me about things. And it was this moment of realizing, oh, I get it now. Like, even if that wasn't even the point of that moment or that being or that teaching, if it wasn't there specifically teaching me how to make these little chimes or bells, I still would have kind of been led in that direction. And I think that's what a big part of the extra dimensional is for humans, that kind of upper world reaching for inspiration and transformation is, whether it's intentional or not, just part of it.
Yeah, I wonder about that term extra dimensional, interdimensional, because this is something that you're hearing more and more these days. I noted that Anna Paulina Luna, this congresswoman who's interested in UFOs, she was just on Joe Rogan talking about interdimensionals and suggesting that the phenomenon was related to quote unquote interdimensionals. Is this really just a different language for talking about different spiritual realms, in your opinion?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes. It's just to make it sound sciencey or Star Trekky. And mostly because why I will use them is dimension means like two measurements, dimension, right? So what is actually going on there is that it's a different perspective on the one reality. And I like that, because that's the actual spiritual reality. It's like, it's actually just all the one stuff. And our perceptive capacities are in fact the thing that allows us to engage with the stuff that's in front of us. But everything else is right there. So I actually quite like extra dimensional, but most of the time I just use flat out magic words for it, like spirit world and what have you.
So with that in mind, I'm not sure exactly what your perspective is, because obviously you clearly believe that there's the core of this is a spiritual phenomenon, as everything is. But where do you stand on the extraterrestrial hypothesis? Could there also be entities coming here from the star systems in physical craft of some kind? Or do you think that's unlikely?
Sure.
Do you think it's all of the above, essentially?
Yeah, exactly. And so to be able to get here from somewhere else, if our measurements out into space are correct, and that's a big if, like we're about to use some data that like comes from unreliable sources and is built on a model of reality that is wrong. So, but it's not useless. We just need to know beforehand, when we get that material about different comets and so on, that it's passed through agencies that are by their constitution designed to lie, and built on a model of reality that's a physical materialist one. So with all of that said, yes, absolutely. But in order to get here from far distances, you're not doing it with a propulsion device, which means almost like by definition, even if they are little green men or ETH, they are still interdimensional because they've had to do some kind of folding to get here anyway. But yeah, of course. And coming back to the unreliable but nevertheless interesting and intriguing data we do have from agencies like NASA and so on, there's very compelling photos, if they're real, from Mars and Phobos and so on, to show that, all right, well, there's stuff out there. That's probably, well, I mean, technically it is a spirit, because whatever they are, they're now spirits. But it's not spirits in the sense of like, oh, my ancestor is here to teach me my grandmother's song. Like it's blown up bits of material, it looks like, on places like Mars and Phobos. And that seems to be, I'm very satisfied with stuff like that. And by the way, I could take it or leave it. Like, I'm very satisfied with it. And you don't have to decide between that one and a broadly speaking spirit model, because the cosmos is magical. Like it's all this one sacred thing. And within that context, you've had presumably millions and billions of years of civilizations all over the place.
Right. And I do wonder, how the military, say, for example, the military industrial complex and the agencies that presumably are lying about this, and the people that work in them see this, because from what I understand, there's a bit of a split behind the scenes in terms of the interpretation of the phenomenon. So you have some quite nuts and bolts theories. These are beings coming in craft from other places. And then there's the presence of what has been called the Collins elite. Mm. If you've ever read a book by Nick Redfern called Final Events, he talks about a kind of faction within the military industrial complex called the Collins elite, who seemingly believe or have come to the conclusion that the phenomenon is demonic. And they're obviously coming from a Christian perspective there. What's your take on that way of seeing things? Or what are they? Would you like share that interpretation in any way, or is that there's different labels for something that you see?
So I would start that story even earlier than that book. I would start it immediately after the war, World War II, just to be accurate, because we got some more coming up. Because this is when you find out that Aleister Crowley and Sybil Leek and others were involved in the and kind of contracted into the nascent formation of the security state in the beginnings of the space race, Jack Parsons and so on. And what you have there sort of bleeding into MK Ultra and so on is you have to understand the elites themselves have changed in their attitude. And if you think about like the mid 20th century elite, the kind of Ian Fleming, I'm really, really rich, I don't care what you think, and I have some wacky ideas. They were kind of better at it. They were kind of better at and more open to the idea that's like, well, maybe they're from another dimension. Maybe there's some kind of spiritual entity rather than a little green man. But actually, our elites have gotten worse over the decades and less nuanced. And I don't think there was that kind of, let's say, magical competence. I don't think it survived Bush as CIA director and vice president. I think that was because that's when you sort of see the privatization of all the top secret clearance stuff. That was clearly part of his job. And so then you get the Collins elite, because then you get the, God bless them, banjo strumming, the earth is 6,000 years old kind of deep American Christians who are left with these phenomena and not the skills or the experience to deal with it. And so they're all demons then. And they're all demons even if they actually are coming from space. It's like you've gone too far in the direction of going, oh, I don't think these are from space. It's like those Christians think even the ones from space are demons, right? So that's kind of what I see happening at an elite level is we've lost the magicians at elite level. And I know everyone, well, not everyone, not people who listen to shows like this, but there's some woolly ideas about, a worldwide Luciferian elite and things, which you're off by 100 years. Like they don't do magic. Elon Musk is not a Luciferian. He's a hyper materialist. You know what I mean? It looks like Luciferianism because because of its the tenets of his belief, but it's not. They don't have that magical skill set that we used to have. I don't mean like they were good at magic, but if you think about Ian Fleming and people like that, they were interested in this stuff because they knew it was some kind of real. And our elites aren't like that anymore. So this is actually what I think has gone on in the background. We've gotten worse at an elite management level, and it's been left to inbred congressmen and a military that inevitably has to deal with like a facts on the ground response and not have as much time for I wonder what this means.
Right. Yeah. So we've got this very unsubtle interpretation of the phenomenon, like they're demons. But I in along the lines of that idea, we kind of come to the question of kind of the sort of, which is often debated in ufology about kind of are the aliens, the quote unquote aliens, quote unquote good or bad? What are they working with us or against us? Are they malicious in intent or not? And as somebody who's very familiar with the spirit world, I wonder if you could maybe sketch out kind of how to think about that. And should we be thinking more in terms of a spectrum rather than kind of saying they're all this or they're all that?
It's a how to say this right? Are they good or bad emerges from the military frame on the phenomena. Like, are they enemies or are they allies? Because you don't find that in indigenous shamanic cultures. Like, spirits are spirits. And if you even just look at the biblical corpus, the majority of terrible things that have happened to mankind have been God or angels. And it's like, aren't they on our side? What the hell just happened? What's going on here? What you find instead, and this is something Alberto Violdo, my teacher, would say, is that, well, actually, let me just tell it differently. In the jungle, you see a jaguar, you maintain eye contact with the jaguar, and it understands that you're a person. If you look away, it sees you as meat. So it's a story of right relation. And I think that's what's going on. I think these beings have their own agendas, just like anything else. Like, is a shark good or bad? Is a storm good or bad? These are things that happen. And in like a cosmology that looks like an ecosystem, that looks like a jungle or a rainforest, there's all kinds of stuff that's in there. And to try to either do a binary of good or bad is overly simplistic, but it's almost more insane to be like, the blue chickens are good, the grays are bad, Like the tall whites are okay, they're smart, but they only like Europeans. And like to go down this list of like, what are you collecting Pokemon? What's happening, right? And again, it's an invitation into how you think the universe works and who you think is in it. And we're out of practice at that understanding. It is part of quote unquote our intellectual and spiritual lineage because it is there in the Bible and it is there in European folk tales and so on. We do actually have a comparable form of nuance available to us, but we just need to be able to step into or permission ourselves into relying on it.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I'm pleased that you raised the point about indigenous knowledge of these phenomena, though. And you're bringing to mind this video that I think maybe some of the viewers will have seen, but probably a lot of them won't. I'll link it in the description below. But on YouTube, there's a video of a YouTuber who has a couple of Brazilian indigenous people as guests on his show, and he shows them a picture of a grey, and immediately they look at this picture. I've actually written down what one of the guys says. He calls it an ant. He calls it Mancuna Wabu. He says, Mancuna Wabu is one who lives underground that became an ant. This ant is very dangerous. If a person is messing with it too much, it takes a person's spirit underground. To bring it back, you have to be a good shaman. There are beings that can appear in divine light, or they are beings that can appear in divine light with the light of Nishipan. They are beings that you can make contact with that live underground. Have you seen that video, Gordon? And what do you make of it?
No, but I like that. That seems correct on the level of, this is coming back to the remote viewing. Like that's a hit. Like whatever the greys are and whatever this Brazilian indigenous person is saying, it's like they're remote viewing the same phenomenon, which we call greys and they call ant people. You look at it and go, yeah, that's a hit. That's like a 65% overlap with broadly considered gray corpus, and you think, all right, I'm into that. And also they live underground. It's like these are underworld entities, which that makes more sense to me than all the other stuff that people say. That like when they say live underground, you're talking about an underworld which is, call it whatever you want, extra dimensional or interdimensional, but it's perceptively lower and almost like behind us. So I like it. I think that the more kind of stuff like that we can get access to, the more intriguing and opening I think the phenomena can become. The goat for that for me is RD6 Killer Clark, who I had on my podcast like a million years ago. But I love her books, and she does like wanders into different indigenous communities in Belize and gets stories of sky people and comes back and goes, these are the stories that they have. And that's really beautiful anthropology to me, because it's without judgment. It's like these are the stories that they showed me. Here they are, and I love that.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's interesting about some of those stories is how many of them speak of other beings having a hand in our evolution at some point, or making us or modifying us in certain ways. Are you familiar with quite a lot of traditions who speak of that, and what's your perspective on how we should see that?
So I think it's almost, I'm more inclined to a literalism in that direction, in a Sumerian direction, let's say, where we are made of like earth mud and something else, than I am certainly to do with evolutionary biology, which is like a low resolution version of the same thing. Like it's really funny. We go around the world with anthropology and go, oh, look, these stories, science is now, God, I hate these words, science is now proving is correct. It's like, no, you've got that reversed. What I would like to do is go around the world and get the most long-lived and thus useful, by implication, stories of our origins, and then use that to pass the rank speculation that is science's version of our origins. Because this place is, when I say created, it sounds artificial. I prefer more organic or analog descriptions of the cosmos, but it's nevertheless intentional. Everything that's here has been birthed or intended. And I think that's true. I think that's like exactly correct. And the the versions of that you find in indigenous cultures, I think, have more medicine than the speculative materialist echoes of them that we can otherwise find in at least Darwinian science, which put science in speech marks with so much of that. It's anyway.
Yeah. I think we were also seeing some other kind of maybe materialist versions of some of those stories becoming very prominent these days. Or if you think about the kind of, alien gods created us narrative, which, which is broadcast constantly on Ancient Aliens and Gaia, it's very, very well known and very powerful, that narrative. And I wonder if you have some thoughts about, what's going on there. Why is there this impulse to really push that very hard on these very big channels?
It's so I think the outgoing cosmology, what we said earlier about the elites, I think the elites have gotten less philosophically or metaphysically sophisticated over the last 50 years. And in the Sitchin era, the Rockefeller Sitchin era of, like, let's say the late 70s, like the Voyager spacecraft era, that belief was pretty common amongst wealthy people. And when I say wealthy people, I mean like the House of Saud. Like, I mean like wealthy people. To the point, like, I had friends back in the day who I went to school with who ended up working on super yachts. And this is for like minor Saudi royalty. And they were the people who would buy on the black market Sumerian tablets and depictions of different gods because they thought they were descended from like Nebuchadnezzar and so on. Like, there is a persistent super elite belief in a literalist Ancient Aliens version, which is obviously self-serving because it's like a right to rule thing rather than it necessarily being true. But I think it's there was a moment in the 70s in particular where very wealthy people had access to material that we're now only kind of realizing was around. And they built, for better or worse, this cosmology of being built by alien gods and having like alien hybrid overlords who were left here to rule over us. And there's something, if that happened, where it was several civilizations ago, right? Like, I've had stories in London. I think I told you this before, but when I was working in telecoms media in London, the conferences were always so interesting because it was people who, from like Indian telecoms companies who never got to get away from their wives or anything. And here they are in London with free booze and they would go nuts. And it was fun. Like, you'd be drinking at 3 a.m. and getting the craziest stories. And this one South African told me when they were running cables somewhere in South Africa, and they were, because he was in the mining industry, and it was like 2 miles down, and they hit all these giant voids, like big rectangular voids that are enormous and artificial, 2 miles down, and you just kind of drill into them and go, nope. And off we go. And that's super interesting because there's something about that is a weird overlap with what Sitchin said about where the Anunnaki came to Earth first, and they had one of them, Enki, I think, had like a base in South Africa. But you get at the edge of like official reality, these hints at, oh goodness, if someone a few decades ago put all of these things together, I can understand why they would come up with, and they might be right, but probably not, some sort of ancient aliens thing, because there's some weird shit left over on this planet, places like Antarctica and wherever. And you can certainly paint whatever story you want with these anomalous findings.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can paint whatever story you want. And I think at least part of what's going on is some sort of war over narratives around this phenomenon, right? And it seems that one strand of that is that people are trying to paint the phenomenon as a threat, essentially, as well. People in people in the national security industries and so forth. We've also got this, what's going on with 3-Eye Atlas at the moment, right? We have Avi Loeb, this Harvard astronomer who is very insistent that this could be an alien probe. And this, as well as Oumuamua from 2017. But part of what he's saying is that it may be a threat. It may be that these beings are coming to get us. What do you think of all that? Do you think this, like, that's really what's going on? There's some kind of big sort of battle over narrative.
The narrative thing, for sure, yeah. For sure. Because, and narrative control is always like an elite thing, but it's been an explicit American policy for about 90 years. Like if you go back to, famously Freud's nephew and propaganda and so on, like narrative control has been the determinant thing that needs to be done. And so you've got a couple of options there. And the first thing you have to do is to demonstrate that you are still in control, which is like it's a military problem. We've got the military on it. We've got secret craft and little bodies and so on. So there's this whole relax. The guys with the guns will take care of you. But I think there's a bigger story there of letting go of or risking losing a very disempowering narrative, which is the materialist capitalist narrative. Once you step into a world where this stuff is real, and not just real like, oh, there's an alien base on the far side of the moon, but real like, we're in some kind of like super group in the cosmos. Like there's meaning and stuff out there. Like the universe is more than iPhones. The universe is more than like queuing up for the next device. Like that will destabilize society more than the reality of aliens, because everything that you otherwise do is sort of predicated on this grim little story of who and what you are. And I think there's, even if it's not conscious, although it always, like, sociologists are very aware of destabilizing like master narratives for societies. I think that's a big part of it. It's like we can't let people know that, as a matter of fact, that civilization on this planet is millions of years old, and we're in contact with like, what Dr. Farrell would call our genetic cousins on other planets. Like this big, beautiful story. It really makes it. You wake up the next day for your job in the call center in a different mood.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, this whole question of kind of, what would happen if the dominant narrative breaks down, I think is pretty opposite right now. And I wonder if you've thought about that. Sort of, what does the world look like as the walls break down and spirit rushes in, and we realize that we've been, told a load of lies for the past few centuries?
See, my metaphor for that is actually weeds. So I don't think anything rushes in. I think what happens is it's like jackhammering up the car park and removing all the cement and just leaving it. And the seed bank will eventually, and initially it'll be weeds, and the weeds will restore minerals to the soil. And then the next plants will grow and grow and grow. And eventually, if it's a cool temperate environment, you will have a mature old growth forest. So I see it more as the collapse of the official narrative is like 60% done, like truly. There's no one believes a thing that's coming out of anywhere, and God save them when they try to issue or institute a draft to have like young people die for either Ukraine or Israel. Like, God save them. Like that's the end of the project, right? And at that point, it's weeds. Like no one needs to be told a new thing. It just, whatever's going to grow is what's going to go. And it is going to look like all of this stuff. It's going to look like Terence McKenna's Archaic Revival, because I happen to think that the quote unquote true nature of a human is one of communion, is one of feeling at home and belonging in the cosmos.
Right on. Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. I did want to ask you some specific questions about specific like aspects of the phenomenon that I can't really weave in any other way. So I'm just going to hit you with a few little nuggets here. Firstly, one of the things that I can see astrologically is a reason why the phenomenon seems to ramp up in the 1940s, which is a really interesting time. And we see a convergence of quite remarkable phenomena at that time. Of course, we have the Second World War and everything that happened there. We have the emergence of the phenomenon in certain ways, which people have put down to different reasons. Are we talking about kind of Nazi secret weapons, or is there some upsurge in this phenomenon for some reason? We have nuclear weapons coming onto the scene. We have the invention of the transistor, and so the kind of real initiation of the digital revolution, and
discovery of Nag Hammadi. Like, it was an exciting time. Yeah.
Yes, that's the other one
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Gnostic trove. What's going on there, and like why are these things all converging, and do you have some thoughts on anything that connects them even?
I will defer to you astrologically on that, only to say that like 46 to 48 was a wild time. Like what? It's like we got these new technological capacities at the same time as we got the instructions. It's like finally these two things showed up at the one time, because if you actually unfocus your eyes and look at what the Nag Hammadi corpus and generally speaking the Gnostic texts we have available to us tell us, it is that you are divine, and that this stuff is, I don't want to say fake necessarily, but you are being sold a bill of goods. You are nevertheless divine, and it is your job to uncover and express that, and that you do so in a cosmos where your experience is central. That is the sacred thing. So we have all these things that have showed up that can, if you like, with the benefit of looking back at it 7 years later, go, oh wow, they kind of all go together in a way that probably no one thought of at the time. I venture some people did. This is kind of coming back to the whole, well, we had an elite at the time who kind of knew things about magic, and were the secret, I think, is that the elite of the first half of the 20th century were a genuine elite where they didn't give a fuck what you think. There's no Twitter, there's no Instagram. Elon Musk cares what you think. That's why he bought X, right? Like, he actually cares what people think. Winston Churchill and his ilk didn't care what the hoi polloi thought. And that is actually freeing to entertain some zany ideas. This is one of the reasons why I think our elite have gotten worse, is that they're not good at being elite. But coming back to your point, and this moment in the 40s, it is singular in the history of this civilization to have all of that stuff show up at once.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not really talked about anywhere near enough. It's so incredible, and without some kind of cyclical model, without astrology or some other model of that kind, you can't really explain that. You know, it's a bit like the axial age or something like that.
Exactly. That is an excellent comparison. It's like what you look at it in history and go, well, something was going on there, or what Robert Temple would call the contact era, like 3500 BC, like something with the benefit, looking at it historically, something happened there that was unusual, and that happened in the 40s for us. Jim Mars, bless his weird soul, he wrote about it extensively. He was like, that was a weird moment. There was a power vacuum that was like not just political that happened in 46 to 48. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And another person who's written a bit about that, or particularly about the transistor, is Chris Knowles, The Secret Sun, who obviously I know you know well. And I'm thinking here about his series, Lucifer's Technologies, where he talks about the discovery of the transistor, or the discovery, or was it, or how was, he kind of questions kind of how this remarkable, extremely powerful piece of technology sort of just showed up there at that really sort of key time. And I believe he speculates that it may be been the result of some kind of ritual, and was some sort of gift. But I do find it odd that technology appears at that time, same kind of time we get the Gnostic texts and nuclear weapons, and the transformation down the road that it's had on society is unbelievably powerful. We're now staring down the barrel of a kind of digital control grid as a result of this technology. And I wonder if you have thoughts on the origins of digital technology and its fundamental nature.
I think we spoke about it on my show, but I'm very interested in like the unfocused eye overlap between Ahriman and any kind of like archonic framing of the entity that is responsible for, but also is managerialism and predictability and reliability, particularly in a synthetic sense, right? And we had a discussion about when it made ingress, and that's kind of the story, let's say, of Ian McGilchrist, Master and his Emissary, that we have this sort of 4th century switcheroo where we we put the bean counter in charge. We put the guy with the spreadsheet in charge, and that's been ecologically disastrous and caused numerous holocausts and all kinds of things, right? It has also given us, speaking of the iPhone, like some pretty neat technology, and that's that's kind of like the cost. As for the transistor as a gift and so on, from memory, Chris has this thing about Roswell being like a ritual to get it, and I'm not sure about any of that, but I will say that something my grandfather said, because he served in the war. And I remember him remarking, like, the night and day difference between technology before and after the war. And because he was a doctor, like things like plastic and so on. But he obviously he knew there was a war because he was in it. But like, it just seemed like too big of a jump when he thought about the beginning of his life, like milk being delivered on horse and cart, to where things were after the war. And he's like, things accelerated rapidly, and the transistor is certainly that. It's like the I don't know, like the archonic landing pad, or like the Archon Grail or something, right? That is this device at the center of what's going to happen next. And we will get a control grid, but we will get something better when that fails, and all of these things kind of will be downstream from the transistor. And I do think, and I know you do as well, it's like, yes, we have nuclear weapons in the 20th century, and dare we say antibiotics, although I go in and out on that. The transistor is the 20th century technology. It will, like, when we come back a couple of centuries time, it'll be that is the thing. And it shows up at that same time. So something is going on there, that if you don't have a lyrical, meaningful, as in full of meaning, frame for how the cosmos operates, you'll miss it.
Right. It is remarkable, I think, and I agree that, we get this technology which does enable this archonic control system to be constructed in, that really the blink of an eye in grand cycle terms. And at the same time, we have the Nag Hammadi texts being discovered, and we have these texts that are essentially sort of warning you and tell you are spirit trapped in this false reality. And it's almost like we're given the technology to build this system at the same time as we're given the sort of
the warning about it. Exactly. Yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. It's like, hang on. It's like, if archons didn't exist, you're about to build them, and so here's what you do about that.
Exactly. No, it's incredible. Maybe we can just actually, I want to ask you about another particular case, something that's going on right now, or something that's come out in the last few weeks anyway, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this study that's been done by astronomers based at the University of Stockholm, led by, her name is Beatrice Villarroel. She's led a team who've done this incredible study into old astronomy plates taken at the Palomar Observatory of the sky in the 1950s, before Sputnik. So before there were any man-made satellites in orbit that we know of. They had all these plates, these photographs of the sky, and they studied thousands of these plates and have identified thousands of what they're calling transients, which are basically lights that are there one moment and not the other. But what they've also done is they've then looked at the correlations between the appearance of these lights and other phenomena, including nuclear testing and UFO flaps. So they've found that the appearance of these lights are correlated to a scientifically significant standard with nuclear tests, with UFO flaps, and they've also found, crucially, that they weren't appearing in the Earth's shadow, which is basically what suggests that they're not actually creating light themselves. They were reflecting light from the sun, implying that they were physical objects, artificial objects of some kind. So essentially what this study seems to have done is proved the existence of some kind of network of objects around the Earth prior to the time that we even put anything up there. And there's also this researcher named Patrick Jackson, who has independently done research on what he calls the sphere network. He believes he's identified a network of metal spheres which fly and appear in formations of three He has countless photographs of these things and has done all sorts of mathematical work to understand how they work and their formations. And it almost looks like he's kind of identified the same thing that they have. And I don't know what to make of this, but if real, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But essentially, it seems to suggest that there's some kind of physical network that's a sort of defense network for Earth. And I don't know if you followed that, or if you what you make of it, that particular story.
Well, you sent me some of that stuff in preparation for the call, and it reminds me. So anything that looks technological, that's before what we could reasonably suggest is like a human breakaway situation, like secret technology until it's not secret, is very intriguing. It's very intriguing. And there's been some like classic 90s things that people think have been debunked, but kind of have, kind of haven't, like the famous Black Knight satellite and things, where there's been stuff in orbit and they're not there. And particularly in times when we didn't have things in orbit, that's very compelling. And it's very compelling because it invites a Joseph Farrell style Versailles Treaty story of like, well, were we under mesh protection? And then once we have the capacity to see that far, do they have to go further out? And so on. Like, is it a prime directive thing? Is that like, now that we can see and we have our own stuff in orbit, you can't park there anymore? I don't know. Because sometimes I think about one of, so the things that happened to Ingo Swann during his lifetime with different members of the breakaway or like deep intelligence industry stuff. And one of these guys he called Axelrod, who took him to Alaska at one point, and they saw a UFO that was zipped in from another dimension. It was like harvesting water from a lake in Alaska and then zipped off. And he got the impression that there was something about Earth as a way station. And I don't think they were actually watering their horses, but there's something about the energetic and physical conditions of Earth that makes it a gas station or a services or what have you for other craft from, I got the impression, from other dimensions rather than other places. And we don't see so much of that. And I wonder if this isn't all hanging together, because it's intriguing that you will get in Indigenous contexts stories. And I'm thinking of RD6 Killer Clark again and her work with the Maya in Belize, where the old people would go to the different ruins like Tikal overnight, and the sky people would show up, and they would show up in craft. They would actually show up in vehicles, right? What I don't know, what appeared to be vehicles, who knows with these things. And so I like the stories and evidence of technology from before a time it could reasonably be considered ours, because it does things like make Ingo Swann, who I do not believe was a liar. He might not have been correct, but I don't think he lied. It's one of those things that you go, okay, well, that's another one in Ingo's camp, right? Like, so that the Earth has a role in this much bigger context outside of like, are they here to, I don't know, invade or whatever? It's like, I don't know. Like they were taking water from Alaskan lake. Like, they're not here. That's not where we keep our elites. I don't know. So I don't know. I find that stuff very compelling and very, that's the closest things get to being like truly alien, because you get a sense of an alien logic. Like, what's happening there? What the fuck is a flying saucer need Alaskan water for? And what are these things that were in orbit and now not? And why are they not? That's an alien logic.
Right. Well, actually, I mean, the suggestion is they may well still be in
sure.
orbit now. It's just there's so much space junk and stuff up there. It's much harder to prove their existence. But I think what Jackson believes is that this is some kind of defense network. He actually suggests that he sees these orbs coming in formations of 3, supposedly to intercept things in the sky, and he believes that whoever put it there lives underground. And actually his idea is that humans are the kind of sort of last line of defense, essentially. So he kind of goes that way.
I probably wouldn't. Good, bless him. Like, you know, he might be right. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily go in that. Usually when you hear stories like that, it's like, what? That's a good example of what are you working out in your own life? And I don't mean negatively, because we're all doing it. Like, what are you working out in your own life to come to that that conclusion, or like what are your interests that lead you there? I don't have a problem with something like a dark forest hypothesis. Like I said, the Mars stuff really does look like, as far as my research could, like reading Brandenburg's books and so on, Berg's books and so on, that it really did look like a weapon signature in the atmosphere and so on. I've heard some other, maybe it isn't, maybe it's like ejected from the sun and so on. But like, I don't have a problem with the idea that the universe is a little bit 40K.
Well, let's wrap this up then. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to, and maybe before we go, you could fill people in on where they can find you, and also if they're particularly interested in this subject. I know you have a course on this and many other things. Perhaps you can fill us in.
Yeah, of course. So runesoup.com is where you can go to find out about joining the premium membership. And in terms of material that's freely available, the best place these days is my Substack. So it's runesoup.substack.com. And that's all completely free. You don't need to pay for that. You actually can't switch that off. So some people, thank you, are like donating money to me on Substack and not getting anything. Just join the membership. And of course, YouTube, where you get most of my videos. But if you do the Substack, you'll get the writing and the podcast, and YouTube, you'll get the videos. And if you want to join, runesoup.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Gordon. It's been fascinating and a real pleasure, as always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's almost it for this video. Thanks so much to Gordon for joining me. You can find details on all of that in the description below. Now, coming up next for members of World Astrology Report, whether on YouTube or at my website, Gordon and I talk Nazis and transhumanism and Peter Thiel and how they all relate to UFOs. Sign up on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com to watch that video. If you enjoyed this and you want to know why I think UFO disclosure is probably coming soon, you might want to watch this video in which I look at some astrological factors pointing in that direction. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. See you again very soon.